Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I want to appreciate what my colleague, the Attorney-General, has brought to the House, and I appreciate the change of heart from the Labor Party on this issue. We've been fighting for people who have been victimised by monsters in our community for 10 years. Been working for this very, very hard. It's been a cause very dear to many people's hearts, not just in the Liberal Party, but in the Tasmanian community. One of the people I hold in the highest regard on this subject is the great Tasmanian Steve Fisher and his organisation Beyond Abuse and its advocacy for justice for many, many years, much longer than I can remember. He's always been there. He's been a great fighter for victims and somebody who's got a very steady hand when it comes to balancing up the policy priorities that are evidenced by this debate here today. I also hold in great respect Laurel House and other organisations that have a different view about the best way to achieve fair and just sentencing. I really appreciate what they do in our community and the love and the care they provide to people during very traumatic events. But we as a government have a very strong view, and the Tasmanian people have had the opportunity of comparing and contrasting the positions of the Liberal Party and the Labor and Greens parties for several elections now. Count them: 3, 2014, 2018, 2019. At each of those elections, the Liberal Party has told the Tasmanian community that if elected, we will take this legislation into Parliament. And after each of those elections, that's exactly what has happened. And each time, until now, it has been blocked by the Labor Party in this House and in the other House. And I hope that this time it will be successful through both Houses, because unless it is, it won't pass into law. Now, what is this motivated by? I totally reject Mr O'Byrne's very cheap political shots that he made, that this is a political campaign for base political purposes. I reject that outright. And to say that shows that he has not been listening. He hasn't heard the voices of those who've been crying out for justice, Mr Deputy Speaker. I believe I speak for many, including members on the other side of this House. We have been appalled in some cases where people who have been found guilty of very serious crimes against children, the worst crimes against the least able to protect themselves, children, the most devastating offences of a sexual nature, traumatic, and for lifelong the scars are there, against people who are the most vulnerable and the least able to defend themselves, the least able to speak up for themselves, Mr Speaker, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's for those people we're elected to protect and defend. To ridicule this policy with Mr O'Byrne's way of calling it whatever, base political cheap shots or whatever else he said, just demeans the point that we have been appalled when we've seen people found guilty of those offences, that they've not been sentenced to a minimum period in jail. Some of them have not gone to jail at all. They've had a sentence and it's been on totally parole. Good behaviour bond. Not acceptable. We say no, that is not acceptable. And let me tell you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and members of this chamber and anyone listening, victims of crime have told us how cheated they have felt. That on the one hand, a conviction was secured in a Supreme Court, and to that extent, a sense of vindication and justice, I've been listened to. My story has held up, my evidence has been accepted, and the conviction recorded. But then to feel, as they have said to me, to my face, how robbed they felt when that person then was able to walk, in their eyes, free. Yes, with a conviction, partial justice perhaps, but to then see somebody convicted of an indictable offence of a sexual assault against a child to be able to then go back and get on with their lives while they, the victim, are left to pick up the pieces and wonder why the court let me down, why the laws let me down, why the Parliament of Tasmania let me down by not having laws in place that would see me receive proper justice. Now, we're all very clever people here, educated and connected and able to read the evidence. I'm more than aware of the conflicting views on this.
The Attorney's
More
Department
than aware.
couldn't give us any
The Attorney's
information
more than
about
aware.
how many times
We
that
can all
happened.
read whatever
There is
report we
no
want to. We're
evidence
blue
that
in the
that ever
face.
happened.
The fact is they are conflicting
Just
views.
making stuff up.
I just
There was
reject
no
that.
evidence
That's just an
provided in the
unhelpful
briefing.
comment.
None.
We're
I
all
asked that
aware of it.
question.
Order.
And I'll tell you one
I asked for the
thing, the
review.
community is safer when they're behind
I
bars
asked
than
for
when
the
they're free,
review.
Mr Deputy Speaker.
You don't care
And I
about
have to make the point
this.
that when it does come to these very serious offences, it is a two-stage justice process. On the one hand, there is the actual conviction. The person is found guilty or not guilty. And the court will continue to do its work just as it always has in that area. The Attorney has not brought in legislation to change that in any way, shape or form. But having secured a conviction against somebody with all of their appeal rights, which get exercised, of course, as they ought, and these facts get tested by a court, and we trust the court to do that.
Exactly.
Then it comes to actually sentencing, meting out the punishment, which on the one hand says to the person, you did this, the consequence for you is you go to jail and you'll serve a period of imprisonment as your punishment. And it sends a message to the wider community as well, not just to the... It does. It sends a message to the wider community that if you're doing this behaviour, if you're found guilty, you can expect the same. It does.
It does.
It absolutely does. And when people understand that certain offences you can get away with it, of course, the deterrent value is evaporated. It goes away. Now, the fact is, other jurisdictions are doing this. We're not, we're not making history here today, except for the fact that for the first time we're bringing in a presumptive sentence. Other states have left us for dead on this matter, and the Commonwealth Parliament as well. I remember well when the Howard government introduced child sex offenders legislation for child sex tourists, Australian citizens, mostly men, who would travel abroad for sex tourism involving children. Now, it's always been illegal in those countries, at least I would like to say it is illegal in those countries, but it hasn't always been apprehended in those countries. And then people return back to Australia, and then they're effectively, quite away from enforcement in those countries, particularly some of our nearer neighbours in less well-off countries, where we have very vulnerable people who have been abused by Australian citizens. And John Howard said, I'm going to do something about this, and introduced an offence that you're breaking a law of Australia when you do that overseas. And good on him, and good on that government, and good on the Labor Party at that time for backing it in. Back in the 90s, that happened. And since that time until now, it's been illegal, not just in those other countries, to abuse and torture children in this way, but it's also been a law that you've broken. While you've been away, you've broken a law of Australia. And 3 years ago, the Australian Parliament combined, Liberal and Labor, to agree that there needed to be minimum sentencing in respect of those offences. We're not setting records here today. There's no great headline except for the fact that after 3 attempts over 10 years of trying, the Labor Party have finally given some ground here and will allow a very common sense piece of legislation to become law. I grieve that it's taken 10 years for the Labor Party to change their position on this, because the federal Labor Party changed it years ago. I think it was 2020 when the Home Affairs Minister brought in those changes to the child sex tourism legislation for Australia. And there was obviously plenty of commentary at that time. I remember it very well. I think it was Bill Shorten, who was the then leader of the Labor Party, had to explain why, after years of opposing mandatory minimum sentencing, that they would change their mind. But it came back to protecting children, Mr Deputy Speaker, and that's where I want to keep this. I'll respect the opinions of those who have come to a different view to myself. Absolutely do. And I appreciate that they've wanted to have something to say. But if you strip it right back to what this is truly about, it's about protecting children. And it's about providing justice to people who have been cruelly treated. Justice. Victims of crime. Yesterday's victims of crime. Tomorrow's victims of crime. I hope that through legislation like this, we can see less of the abuse
Well, you're not listening
that
to
has
the
cruelled
sector.
the lives of Tasmanian children.
You're not listening
including
to the sector.
people I know very
It
well,
won't. It
and
won't
who
do it.
I stand here today for,
Yeah.
in their place,
You are gonna make it
speaking
worse.
for them,
That's what's happening.
speaking for their justice, for their welfare,
You're making it
and for their
worse.
future. And I'm offended at the behaviour of the Greens that they will speak like this here today, when there are good people like Steve Fisher speaking up for many, many people who don't feel that they can speak up the way he does. He speaks for them. And we need to listen to him.
More re-traumatising.
And we need to listen to
less
him.
Convictions.
And we
That's
need
what
to
the sector
hear
said.
their voice in this debate and keep our focus not on the politics, not on the Liberal, not on the Labor, on the children in whose place we are here today to represent and speak for them with a sense of care, a sense of duty, a sense of responsibility. Because we all know it's going to keep happening in our community. It will continue to happen. We have to prevent it wherever we can, but when it does happen, the person needs to be reported, police need to do their job and investigate. Where the evidence is gathered, they need to charge. Where the charges are brought forward, the court needs to do its work to examine the evidence, allow the defence to be run so that the person is properly defended, and ultimately a decision is formed. And then there might be an appeal, and there often is. And ultimately justice needs to be served in the court of law. The truth needs to come out, and people need to be empowered to get their justice. But then, having secured that conviction on these range of offences that the attorney has quite properly brought into this bill, a person ought to know they're going to jail.
That's right.
And I'll tell you something else, Mr Deputy Speaker. I think 4 years in prison for the crime of rape against a child feels far too brief for my liking.
What about life?
It feels far too brief for me. And be very careful, please, Ms Haddad, when you talk about life. You're not serious. The maximum sentence under these laws is something like, 15-ish years, nowhere near the current maximum under the criminal code, which allows for up to 21 years. If you're serious about this, I look forward to your private member's bill, if you're serious. But I don't think you are, because the only time I hear the Labor Party talking about maximum sentence changes is when we're trying to introduce minimums.
That's right.
That makes me wild. It is absolutely a deflection from the real issue. That some people in this state, men and women, have offended against children and haven't gone to jail for 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, or even 1 year. That is a fact. It makes my blood boil. It upsets me a lot. Because as an MP, as a father, as an uncle, as a person who's grown up in this state, I've come into contact with far too many people whose lives have been harmed by a very selfish, cruel other person. And it's got to stop. And this House has a role. There's nothing wrong with the law insofar as these offences are already against the law. And if a future Attorney-General ever dangles in front of me another opportunity to toughen up the law, I'll vote for it. I will be there. And while they're in prison, hopefully they can get some help and learn about how cruel they've been and how they can change and be reformed. Accept what they've done and own it, and understand that while they're in that custody, they ought to make a decision to be a better man, a better woman, and put in place some things that stops them from ever thinking that they've got an excuse to do this to an innocent person ever again. It upsets me greatly. And I'll say it again, 4 years still feels too brief, because the victim of crime will live with this for their lifetime. And again, it's wonderful people at our organisations, like the Sexual Assault Support Service, like Laurel House, like Beyond Abuse, and
They don't
others
want this
who will
bill.
continue.
They don't
Who
want
will?
it.
I'm not
Why
going
don't
to
you
buy
speak
into
the truth?
those interjections again.
But
They
that's
will
what
continue
That's what they've said.
to support people through their time of
You
trial,
haven't asked their view.
through their time
You
of
haven't
trauma.
talked to them. How dare you?
You're the
invoke-
voice
how dare
for
you
soft
invoke
on
them?
crime, Ms.
How
Dr.
dare you
Woodruff.
invoke
You're the
them?
voice
Order.
for soft laws.
How dare you?
You're the
invoke
voice.
them? You
And I'll be the
haven't spoken
voice
to them.
for
You're a
tougher
member
laws,
for BAS.
and I'll be the voice for justice, not for soft justice as the Greens would have us have.
Strong man.
And who could forget
Big
Tim
man.
Morris, the Green MP, who stood at that box and said that the Greens' policy was just ask them to sign a document that they won't do it again and then let them out of jail. That was honestly what he said. In this room, at that place, soft on crime. What on earth, what message does that send to the community? 3 years imprisonment for the crime of persistent sexual abuse of a child or a young person. That's a minimum. 2 years imprisonment for the new crime of penetrative sexual abuse of a child or a young person by a person in authority. If this House stands for anything, it can stand for saying that if you are found guilty of those 3 offences, you're going to jail. You're going to jail.
Judges.
Now, the court might decide you should go to jail for longer.
Right. Their job.
They don't always, and that's the
Their
point.
job, not yours.
And the issue here is that it doesn't always happen. Now, as it is, our Attorney-General has worked very hard on this legislation, and many people in the community would have preferred a straight mandatory minimum without the opportunity to test that with exceptional circumstances. But here we are. This is the balance that the Minister, the new Attorney has found.
That's the old bill.
And let me be clear about it. He's done it to get your support as well.
You're
Ms.
talking-
Haddad,
You're talking about.
he's done it to get your
2022
support
bill,
as well.
actually.
To try to find a way to progress this legislation, because otherwise we know what you'd have done.
You're
You'd have
quoting-
blocked it again.
You're quoting from
You'd
the
have blocked it
2022
again.
bill. You're quoting
Because
from
that's
the
your
wrong
habit.
bill.
That's your position. That's where you come
The
from.
attorney will correct
And
you.
it's unhelpful, and it would have stopped the legislation. Am I wrong?
You're quoting from the wrong bill.
Am I wrong?
You're quoting
I don't think I'm wrong.
You're quoting from the 2022 bill, Treasurer.
I'll say it again, that the issue here is that we want to see progress in this space, and we want to see less of the Labor Party blocking something that's good, something that will provide justice and fairness for people who have been treated without justice, without fairness, and with no regard for their personal dignity, their sexual privacy, their sense of growing into a happy and confident young Australian that's been offended against. I'm very sorry that we're having this debate today, Mr Deputy Speaker, because this ought to have been law 9 years ago. I absolutely praise Attorney Barnett for his work on this. I absolutely praise him for it. If I could vote for it 10 times, I would. I'll be voting for it today. I commend the bill to the House. I absolutely reject again the false assertion that there's base politics before an election being played. I won't have it. It's not where we're coming from. But I want to see this become law, and it can't come soon enough.